They built a deadly simulation to expose humanity's weakness, but instead, they unlocked something no species was prepared for. What happens when the most underestimated cadet in the galaxy breaks every rule of war in under 12 seconds? You won't believe who was really watching her. The Proxima Helix training station drifted in low orbit around the fractured remains of Eros 9, a dead moon scorched by plasma storms and long-forgotten wars. From a distance, the station resembled a spinning blade, sleek, efficient, and unmistakably dangerous. Inside, it thrummed with the quiet precision of a machine built not for comfort, but for producing killers. Lena Rourke stood alone in Observation Deck C, watching the moon's shattered horizon through reinforced glass. Her reflection stared back, white hair tied into a low knot, slate gray eyes focused and unreadable. Around her, cadets of dozens of species moved with rehearsed purpose, clawed, scaled, titan-plated, or tentacled, each one sharper than the last. But they never looked at her for long. That was the thing about humans here. They looked soft, until they weren't. A low chime pulsed from her wristband. Message: neural simulation override session assigned. Lena frowned. She hadn't requested a sim. Not today. Not for another 72 hours. Her schedule was clear, logged, and locked. A second pulse followed. Instructor clearance verified. Mandatory engagement. No sender listed. She tapped the glass absently, eyes narrowing as stormlight flickered across the broken moon. Then she turned, her boots silent against the composite floor as she moved toward the sim wing. Behind her, the room seemed to hold its breath. Proxima's Neural Sync Wing was one of the most advanced VR combat simulation centers in Allied space. Everything was run through direct neural links, no haptic suits, no visual feeds. Your brain thought it was real, and that made it real enough to bleed or break. Lena stepped into Pod 4. The interface screen glowed with the Academy's insignia and a line of blinking data. Participant loadout for active SM type, adaptive combat, class, read recording status, disablit. That stopped her cold. Disabled. No session was ever unrecorded ever. Even basic sims had triple backups, data scrubbers, and observer eyes. It wasn't just protocol. It was protection, accountability, override reason. She murmured. No response. The console was blank beyond those 3 words. Recording status, disablet. Slow. Icy tension crawled up her spine. Something was wrong. Someone wanted this off the record. But who? She glanced down at the biometric reader. 3 other neural IDs had already sensed in. She recognized one of them. Drexari signature. High-level clearance. Combat rank. Lena exhaled through her nose, stepped forward, and lowered herself into the pod. As the harness closed over her, her pulse held steady. Her mind didn't scream. It listened, calculated, stored. Okay, she muttered to the empty pod. Let's see what kind of game this really is. Then her world dissolved into light, and the real simulation began. The world reassembled around her in jagged flashes of color and sound. Lena's boots hit the ground hard, and even terrain beneath her. She blinked. Dust swirled in the air, tinted blood orange by a sky that churned like an angry sea. The simulation had dropped her in a war zone, a fractured cityscape scarred by orbital bombardment. Buildings leaned like snapped bones. Fires danced across the horizon. But something was wrong. No HUD. No threat indicators. No vitals monitor. Not even a basic orientation grid. Just heat, smoke, and silence. Lena crouched, fingertips brushing the scorched concrete. The temperature felt real. To real. Neural latency, normally a razor-thin delay between thought and environment, was off, heavier, slower. Her mind kicked into combat logic. No HUD, no UI, no observer presence. That wasn't a sim malfunction. It was a stripped-down. She wasn't here to train. She was here to be tested, or worse, removed. A crunch echoed behind her. She didn't turn, just listened. 3 sets of footsteps, wide gate, heavy mass, synchronized motion. She knew the profile before she saw them. Lena Rourke. A voice called out, casual, drawled, dripping with theatrical condescension. Didn't expect to see you here. This scenario wasn't on the rotation. She stood slowly, turning to face them. 3 Drexari cadets emerged from the ash. Their armored exosuits shimmered with adaptive camo, though they didn't bother masking themselves now. High-tier combatant Skovek, Isil, Brick top of their class in close quarters neutralization. All three stood a head taller than her, their twin-slit eyes glinting like predators pretending to be polite. Kovac smirked. We thought we'd drop in. Sim malfunction. Right. System override. Real weird. How? Yeah, Lena said flatly. Weird. Brick flanked right. Isil to the left. Not close enough to be threatening yet but tightening the triangle. You humans, Isil said, tone syrupy. Always get jittery when things go a little off script. Relax. We're just here to observe. I wasn't aware the Drek sorry. We're so community-minded, Lena replied deadpan. Must have missed that part of your cultural briefing. Kovac laughed. It didn't reach his eyes. You've made quite an impression. Rourke, he said. Top marks in tactics. Reflex. Speed off the charts. And that little seminar where you corrected Instructor Vel in mid-sentence. That was brave. Lena didn't move. Her hands hung loose at her sides, but her eyes tracked every breath, every twitch in their shoulders. You're trying to provoke me, she said, but this isn't the part where I react. No. Brick growled. Then maybe it's the part where we teach you how things actually work out here. That's when Lena's wristband buzzed subtle, barely noticeable. She slid a glance down. One line of text blinked across her neural overlay, like a ghost slipping through a firewall. And known biosignal detected at Quadrant Zeta 6. Origin, non-cadet, non-academy, fourth entity present. Lena's pulse didn't spike. She just smiled barely. Interesting, she murmured. What was that? Kovac asked. She looked up, eyes cold and sharp. Nothing, Lena said. Just realized this sim's got more players than you thought. The moment shattered. YSL moved first predictably. Drexori tactics favored the pincer. Bait with arrogance, collapse with brute force. She lunged, claws extending midair. A blur of chitin and aggression. Lena sidestepped. No wasted motion. No flare. Just a pivot, a rotation of exactly 18 degrees on her heel. Isil's momentum carried her past too fast to compensate. Lena raised her arm not to strike, but to redirect. Her palm made contact with Isil's shoulder joint. A precise nudge, a neural spike. The VR simulation registered it as a non-lethal force, but the Drexari nervous system read it as a misfire. Isil's equilibrium collapsed. She tumbled. Hit the ground hard. Dazed, confused, reflex loops spinning. Combat. Analysis. Drexari Cadet Isil incapacitated. Minimal force detected. 98.2% neural efficiency. Kovac didn't wait. He charged headlong center mass, full force. War cry erupting through the ash. Lena's eyes narrowed. She'd seen it in recordings. Kovac's signature strike, double feint, left shoulder lead. Finishing blow aimed high. She didn't block. She was absorbed. Dropped her stance, shifted her center of gravity, let him overextend. At the final second, her hands rose open palmed, fingers splayed and caught the sides of his armor. Then she twisted. A half-moon spiral step. Kovac's own inertia became his executioner. He launched sideways, crashed into the remnants of a scorched vehicle. His shoulder plate cracked audibly. Not from damage but from the sim's neuromuscular feedback loop triggering failure response. His neural link stuttered. Force registered, 60.5 kilograms per square centimeter. Threshold, subcritical. Outcome, simulated joint failure. Reflex prediction index, 99.1%. Only Brick remained, the largest, the slowest, the most dangerous. He didn't roar, didn't posture. He waited. Smart. Lena circled him. The dust had settled enough to draw breath. She rolled her neck once, cracked her knuckles, and said quietly, "You're not here to test me." Breck's eyes narrowed. "You're here to confirm something." And then he vanished. Cloak. Advanced Drexori tech. Illegal in most simulations. The kind of thing used in wet ops. Lena closed her eyes, breathed. One breath. To on the third, she moved. Backward. Left turn, elbow raised and connected with a body mid-swing. Brick dropped cloak mid-motion, claws already extended. But her strike had landed right under the jaw hinge. A nerve cluster. Stun point. The simulation froze for a millisecond. Warning, non-standard reflex pattern detected. Analyzing. Lena didn't wait for permission. She twisted Breck's arm around his own back, dropped him with a low sweep, and pressed a single fingertip to the back of his neck. Soft touch. Kill signal non-lethal only because she chose it to be. Combat complete. All threats neutralized. Total time 11.7 seconds. She stood, breathing steady. Uniform dusty. No wounds. All three Drexari sprawled across the terrain, alive but neurologically. Flatline sim overload. Then the sky fractured. A red line of code tore through the clouds like lightning. The entire simulation pulsed with a warning tone not meant for cadets. Alert, reflex tier 0 detected. And known pattern match, activation, human neural signature Rourke, Lena. Response level priority red. Command escalation required. Lena looked up. For a moment, the environment flickered -glitched. And behind the broken skyline, a fourth figure stood. Still, UNMOVING. Watching. The world snapped off like a switch. Lena's eyes opened to cold light and silence. She was lying on a medical slab in Proxima Helix's neural recovery bay. The sterile scent of antiseptics sharpened her nose. A thin layer of biosensor gel coated her temples, and the hum of magnetic stasis fields vibrated faintly in the air. Her heartbeat was steady and naturally so, she realized. Regulated. She sat up slowly. No pain, no disorientation. Her neural pathways had already been flushed and stabilized. To fast, to clean. They wanted her lucid. Two security officers stood at the door, motionless, not Drexari, not even species she recognized. Black visors, silent. A moment later, the door hissed open. Cadet Rourke, said a voice like frost. "You come with me." She did. They took her not to the standard debriefing room, but deep below the main station, into a part of the facility she hadn't even known existed. The walls here were matte black, no insignias, no lights except narrow red strips that pulsed faintly overhead. The room they led her to was circular, domed, and lined with projectors and data nodes. A tribunal, 12 seats, elevated, each occupied by a different species: insectoid, reptilian, crystalline, human, and more she couldn't name. The United Command Oversight Council. She knew their silhouette from rumors, briefings that were never repeated. No introductions were offered. A hologram blinked to life in the center of the room, grainy, like corrupted data. It showed her, inside the simulation, dismantling the 3 Drexari cadets in under 12 seconds, frame by frame. No sound, just movement, precision, control. Then came the anomaly. The red pulse of code across the sky. The fourth figure. A silence hung in there like gravity. Finally, one of them spoke in elderly Alteri, gills fluttering with tension. "Do you know what you triggered, Cadet Rourke?" Lena held his gaze. "I triggered nothing. I was defending myself." That, rasped the Centauri female, her mandibles twitching, wasn't self-defense. That was containment. Surgical containment. Lena said nothing. Another member leaned forward. A human, this time older, sharp eyes behind thin spectacles. "The simulation you entered was not an error," he said. "It was designed, authorized, top-level directive." Lena's jaw tensed. "You set me up." "No," the man said. "We measured you." Across the room, new holograms flared, charts, data streams, neural reaction graphs, and combat response overlays, all labeled subject, Lena Rourke classification, Tier 0 response UNIT, and declared you were part of Project Halo. The human continued, shut down, classified, disavowed. "But your training survived. And now," said the Centauri, "you've demonstrated capability that surpasses known threat thresholds for standard species containment." Lena's voice was low. "So what now? You deactivate me." The council didn't laugh. They never did. "No," said the Alteri elder. "We reassigned you." A panel slid open behind Lena. A new insignia lit the far wall, stylized, angular, and recognizable. A black veil over a red star. "The Veil Initiative," said the human counselor. "Operatives recruited from beyond protocol, from species deemed variable." "Assassins?" Lena asked. "Prevention units," the human corrected. "Intervention, contingency. We send in the people we can't officially send." Lena looked at the emblem again. "You built a simulation to test how far I'd go," she said quietly. "No," Alteri replied. "We built it to see if you'd stop short." Lena didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she nodded once. What happens to the Drexari? Medically stable, came the reply, emotionally rattled. Their memories of the event will be limited. She turned toward the door. And one more thing, the human counselor called out. That fourth signature in the simulation, not one of ours. Lena paused. Then who was it? The room fell silent again. That's what we intend to find out. She left without another word, the mark of the veil burning behind her like a quiet brand. 2 days later, the Proxima Helix training station broadcast a single-line notice to its entire cadet network. Cadet Lena Rourke, honorably discharged. Transferred to off-site assignment. No ceremony, no explanation, no goodbyes. Most cadets barely looked up from their screens. A few Drexari flinched. Isil refused to comment. Kovac claimed memory loss. Brick hadn't spoken a word since. Lena stood at Dock 17, dressed no longer in standard academy grays, but in a sleek matte black uniform devoid of insignia. Only a faint shimmer at her collar hinted at a symbol beneath, something sharp and angular, pulsing faint red when viewed from the right angle. The Veil's transport ship was silent, unmarked, and terrifying in its simplicity. No registry, no escort. It didn't arrive, it appeared. A figure emerged from its boarding ramp. Tall, cloaked, humanoid but wrong, eyes too far apart, no visible mouth. It didn't speak aloud, but Lena heard it. You've been watched longer than you realize. She didn't flinch. What is the Veil really? She asked. The figure tilted its head. Something like amusement flickered in the air. We are the knife in the dark that stops the war before it begins. We are the ones the galaxy pretends don't exist because it's safer that way. And what do you want from me? It stepped aside, motioning toward the ship's dark interior. Not obedience, not loyalty, just one thing. Lena raised an eyebrow. What's that? When the time comes. Don't hesitate. She stared into the ship for a moment, then stepped inside. As the ramp closed behind her, the transport lifted without sound. No departure broadcast, no trace. Only a soft message, pulsing through the classified networks of the Allied Command, visible only to those cleared for level black access. Operator-initiated Rourke. Lena, the Veil protocol is now active. Prepare for Phase 2. Somewhere, beyond uncharted space, a monitor flickered on. The figure from the simulation, the one Lena never saw clearly, watched the file download complete. A whisper passed through the dark. She passed, and the screen went black. If humanity was just tested, who's next? What do you think the Veil is really hiding? Drop your theories in the comments because Phase 2 is coming.